Please, sir, my mommy said you have to read this today. The small voice echoed through the marble lobby of Knight Technologies, drawing curious stares from every direction. Aaliyah Johnson, no taller than the security desk, clutched a crumpled envelope to her chest as if it were the last thing keeping her world together. Her yellow dress was wrinkled, her shoes scuffed, but her eyes, deep and unwavering, carried a courage no one could teach. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. She had walked past the revolving glass doors of one of the most powerful corporations in America, alone. Not lost. Not afraid. Just certain. Upstairs, Alexander Knight, the 38-year-old CEO known for his unbreakable composure and colder-than-glass demeanor, ruled over a billion-dollar empire that thrived on logic and control. He had long buried the man he once was under layers of power and precision. But the moment he glanced through the glass walls of his boardroom and saw her, something in him stopped breathing. A hush swept through the lobby. Even the receptionist's voice softened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Aaliyah," she said, steady as a promise. "My mommy says you'll remember us when you read this." The executives nearby froze. The letter trembled slightly in her small hands, creased, lavender-scented, written in a woman's handwriting Alexander hadn't seen in years. This isn't just a story about a child who dared to interrupt a titan's world. It's about how truth travels across years, through silence and pain, and finds the one heart it refuses to forget. It's about second chances written in ink and sealed with love that never died. Outside, the morning sun glinted against the tower's mirrored glass. Inside, Aaliyah stood like a tiny warrior at the gates of a kingdom she didn't know she already belonged to. She approached the front desk again, her voice clear despite the tremor in her lip. "Please, can you tell him it's from my mommy, Naomi Johnson?" She said he'll understand. And that was how it began, the day a little girl's letter cracked open the heart of a man who thought he could no longer feel. 8 years earlier, before the towers and titles, before the silence and lies, Alexander Knight was just a man caught in a snowstorm, and Naomi Johnson was the stranger who offered him shelter. But that memory, once vivid, once tender, had been buried beneath deadlines, power, and the hollow applause of boardrooms. Until now. Now that same man sat alone in his glass-walled office high above the city, staring at a letter that refused to stay still in his trembling hands. The paper was soft at the edges, folded and refolded, the faint scent of lavender rising from it like a ghost of the past. The handwriting, graceful, familiar, made his pulse stutter. Naomi's loops and curves danced across the page just as he remembered, precise yet gentle. He hadn't seen it in years, yet every letter carried her voice. He leaned back in his chair, eyes darting to the little girl waiting quietly near the door, her yellow dress glowing against the gray skyline beyond. She watched him with unblinking trust, tiny fingers clutching the hem of her dress. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The letter was her voice. Alexander forced himself to read. "Alexander, you once told me you didn't believe your life would ever mean anything beyond business. That night, I saw the man beneath the armor. From that moment, our daughter was born. I never told you because I was afraid of your world, of your power, and of losing the one piece of peace I had found. But now I am dying, and Aaliyah has no one else in this world but you. She is your daughter. Please don't let her grow up believing she was unwanted. Naomi Johnson." The words blurred. He blinked once, twice, then again, but they wouldn't stop shaking. A soft sound escaped him, something between a sigh and a gasp. His breath caught as a heat rose in his chest, spreading through his throat until it burned behind his eyes. He hadn't cried in 20 years. Not when his father died. Not when he buried his mother. He built his empire on discipline, control, and precision, virtues that left no room for weakness. But now, as he stared at Naomi's handwriting, all of that cracked. He saw her as she'd been that night, smiling through candlelight in a small diner off Highway 43, her laughter melting the snowstorm outside. He had been stranded, angry, half-frozen, and lost in his own ambition. She had poured him coffee with trembling hands, talking about her dreams like they were possible. And for one night, he believed they were. His hand tightened around the letter. The sound of paper crumpling echoed faintly in the silent office. Aaliyah's small voice broke through. "Did she tell you what's inside?" He looked up. The question startled him, not because of the words, but because she asked it like she already knew. "No," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "She didn't have to." Aaliyah tilted her head, studying him. Mommy said once you read it, you'd remember us. Us. That single word split something open in him. He looked at her again, really looked. The way she tilted her head. The soft curl of her hair. Even the quiet strength in her eyes. There was no denying it. Naomi's daughter. His daughter. Alexander swallowed hard. The air in the room felt thinner, heavier. He set the letter on his desk, fingers still trembling. "Where is your mother now?" he asked. "She's at home," Aaliyah said. "She gets tired a lot. Sometimes she forgets things. The doctor said she needs medicine that costs a lot of money." Her voice faltered on the last words, but her gaze stayed steady. Alexander leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fighting the storm of emotion rising inside him. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where they lived, why Naomi hadn't reached him sooner, how long she had been sick, but his mind felt like it was underwater. All he could see was Naomi's face. All he could hear was her laughter. And all he could feel was the guilt that came from realizing how easy it had been for him to forget something that had meant everything. He reached for the letter again, tracing the signature with his thumb. Naomi Johnson. The name tasted like regret. The door behind him clicked open. "Alexander, your 3 o'clock meeting." Victoria's voice froze mid-sentence. She stood at the threshold, elegant in her tailored cream suit, her phone in hand. Her eyes darted from the little girl to the letter on the desk, then to Alexander's face. The color drained from her cheeks. "Who is this?" she asked softly. Alexander didn't answer. He couldn't. Victoria stepped closer, her heels barely making a sound on the marble floor. Her gaze flicked to the envelope, handwritten, lavender-scented, unmistakably intimate. A muscle twitched in her jaw. Where did that come from? Aaliyah turned toward her, clutching her small purse like a shield. "My mommy wrote it. She said Mr. Knight would understand." Victoria's expression didn't soften, it hardened. Naomi's name on the letter caught her eye. For a fraction of a second, something passed through her face, not confusion, not shock, but recognition. Alexander noticed. He rose slowly from his chair. "You know her." Victoria blinked. "What? No, of course not. Why would I?" "Don't," he said sharply. His voice carried the weight of command he used in boardrooms, but this time it was personal, raw. "I saw your face." Victoria's composure wavered. "Alexander, this is absurd. Some woman sends a child here with a story." "It's not a story," he cut in, his voice low but trembling. "It's a confession." The silence that followed was electric. Aaliyah stepped closer to the desk, small and unflinching. "Mommy said Miss Victoria wouldn't like the letter." The color drained further from Victoria's face. Alexander turned toward her, disbelief twisting into something darker. What did she mean by that? Victoria's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked cornered, calculating. "She's just a child, Alexander. You can't take everything she says at face value." But he could feel it now, the old instinct that had built his empire, the one that sensed when someone was lying. And Victoria was lying. He picked up the letter again, his knuckles white. "Naomi said she reached out before. Did she?" Victoria's eyes darted away. "Alexander, this isn't the time. Answer me." The sound of his voice made Aaliyah flinch. He immediately regretted it, but the fury consuming him left no room for gentleness. Victoria exhaled slowly, regaining her practiced calm. "If she ever tried to contact you, I never saw it. You were busy. We both were. People like her." "People like her?" He took a step forward, his tone deadly quiet. "She's the mother of this child." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't deny it this time. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city outside glowed gold in the setting sun, reflections of fire and glass flickering across the office walls. Aaliyah's voice broke the tension again. "Mr. Knight, can you help my mommy?" Alexander's chest tightened. He looked at her, this little girl who carried the weight of truths he hadn't been brave enough to face. "Yes," he said finally. "I can." He reached for his phone, already dialing. "Get me the Johnson medical file," he said to his assistant, his voice steadying with purpose. "Every record, every address, every name." Victoria stepped forward. Alexander, you can't just. I can, he said, turning on her, his eyes blazing. And I will. For the first time in years, he wasn't acting like a CEO. He was acting like a man who had something to lose. He hung up and turned back to Aaliyah. You said your mother's name is Naomi Johnson. Where does she live? Aaliyah fumbled for a small piece of paper in her purse. Here, she said, handing it to him. She said if you ever wanted to find us, this is where home is. The handwriting on the note matched the letter. Same lavender scent. Same soft edges. He stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into his jacket pocket. Then he knelt down so he was eye level with her. Aaliyah, he said quietly, I'm going to see your mother. But you have to go with my assistant first. She'll take care of you until I come back, okay? The little girl hesitated. You promise? He swallowed. I promise. She nodded slowly, then took his hand, small, warm, trusting. As she was led out of the room, Alexander turned toward the window. The city stretched endlessly before him, bright and hollow, like everything he'd built. Behind him, Victoria stood frozen. Her phone still glowed in her hand, but she wasn't calling anyone. Her lips were pressed together in a thin line, her eyes calculating. Alexander didn't see her expression as he left the room, letter in hand. But if he had, he might have recognized it, not fear. Anticipation. Because Victoria had always known this moment would come. And she had already prepared for what came next. 8 years earlier. The storm came without warning, one of those blizzards that swallowed the sky whole and left the world a blur of white and howling wind. Alexander Knight's car had given up on him 3 miles outside a nameless town in Vermont, its engine coughing out a final pitiful sigh before going silent. He'd been driving for hours then, fleeing from a meeting that had ended in betrayal and a father who'd called him a disappointment. His breath misted against the cold glass as he punched the steering wheel, cursing under his breath. The snow thickened until the world vanished. Then, through the haze of frost, he saw it, a flickering light from a cabin half buried under the snow. He trudged through knee-deep drifts, shoes soaked, suit jacket no match for the cold that bit through him like teeth. By the time he reached the porch, he could barely feel his fingers. The door opened before he could knock. Are you crazy? You'll freeze out there. Her voice was soft, urgent, a melody against the storm. She was wrapped in a wool sweater, curls spilling messily over her shoulders, cheeks flushed from the heat of the fire behind her. Naomi Johnson. He didn't know her name then, only that she smelled faintly of lavender and rain. Car broke down, he managed, his voice rough. Didn't know where else to. Come in. She stepped aside before he finished. The warmth hit him first, the crackle of fire, the scent of pine, the faint hum of an old record player spinning something slow. She led him to the hearth, where a blanket waited as if she'd known he was coming. He sat in silence, watching the flames dance, thawing piece by piece. You look like you ran from something, she said after a while, her tone light but her eyes too knowing. He gave a hollow chuckle. Something like that. Naomi poured him tea. Her hands were steady. You don't have to talk about it. But she had that kind of quiet that invited truth. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Alexander found himself speaking. About his father's empire. About the deal that went wrong. About being told, you're not ready. You'll never be ready. She listened. No judgment. No agenda. Just listened. When he finished, she smiled faintly. Sometimes you have to lose the world to find what's worth keeping. He looked at her then, really looked. The way the firelight touched her skin, the gentleness in her eyes that reminded him of home, the one he never had. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside, the air softened. She gave him soup, an old flannel shirt that had belonged to her brother, and a space on the couch. But neither of them slept. At midnight, when the power flickered out, they lit candles. She showed him a stack of drawings she'd done, sketches of children, old people, ordinary lives. I work at a daycare, she said. And sometimes at the nursing home on weekends. Why? He asked. Because everyone deserves to be seen, she said simply. He stared at her, wondering when he'd last met someone who believed that. The silence stretched. His hand brushed hers when she reached for another candle. She didn't pull away. And then the world shrank to the space between them. No plans. No promises. Just two lost souls seeking warmth in the middle of a frozen night. When dawn came, the snow had stopped. The world outside was blinding white, perfect and silent. Naomi stood by the window, hair haloed by morning light. He wanted to memorize her like that, barefoot, half smiling, holding the cup he'd used the night before. He told her his name before he left. Just his first name. Alexander. She smiled. I'm Naomi. He hesitated at the door. Thank you for last night. Her voice was soft. Some nights aren't meant to be forgotten. But he did forget, or tried to. The days after blurred into the chaos of mergers, headlines, and rebuilding his father's empire. He buried the memory beneath layers of ambition, convinced it was just a moment, a beautiful accident in the snow. Until the letter arrived. Alexander's hands clenched around the paper, the past bleeding into the now like ink on water. She never asked for anything, he whispered, more to himself than to the empty office. Not a word in 8 years. The scent of lavender still lingered on the paper, faint but real, a ghost from the cabin. He remembered the way she'd smiled at him over candlelight. The way she'd said everyone deserves to be seen. Now she was dying. And there was a child, a daughter. His daughter. A knock shattered the silence. Victoria stepped in, the click of her heels sharp against the marble floor. She was elegance embodied, polished, poised, every line of her perfection sculpted for the spotlight. But when her eyes fell on the letter in his hand, something changed. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Fear. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice too calm. He turned to her slowly. You know about this. Her lips parted. Alexander, listen to me. This is probably some scam. People know who you are. They'll say anything for money. He held her gaze. It's her handwriting. Victoria's mask faltered for half a second, and that was enough. You knew, he said, his voice low, dangerous. You knew about Naomi. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The air between them thickened, 8 years of silence pressing in. Alexander, please, she whispered. Don't do this. Whoever sent that letter is telling the truth, he finished for her. He dropped the letter on the desk, the lavender scent rising like a ghost between them. Victoria's eyes glistened, but not with guilt, with dread. And then she said the one thing that made the blood drain from his face. You weren't supposed to find out. The words hung in the air, trembling, final. And Alexander Knight, billionaire, empire builder, man of steel, felt his world crack open again, just like it had that night in the snow. The bus hissed to a stop, coughing out gray breath into the cold morning air. Aaliyah Knight pressed her mittened hands to the window and counted under her breath. One more, she whispered. Just one more. Her voice was small, but determined, the kind that had learned to be brave even when her heart shook. The second bus was late again, and she was late again, but she didn't care. Today wasn't a school day. Today was mission day. In her backpack were 3 things: a photo of her mother, a crumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled in her mother's handwriting, and a folded letter with her own shaky scrawl across the top, for Mr. Knight. She had practiced what she'd say for weeks. In the mirror. In the dark. Sometimes even to the photo of the man she'd seen only once, on TV, standing beside a woman in a glittering dress, smiling the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hello, Mr. Knight, she murmured now, testing the words again as the bus rumbled forward. My name is Aaliyah. My mom's name is Naomi. I think you're my dad. Her chest tightened just saying it. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because Mama didn't have time. Back in their apartment, Naomi Johnson lay curled on the couch, her breathing shallow. The morning light fell across her face, pale and fragile as paper. The air smelled faintly of lavender, Aaliyah's doing. She'd insisted on spraying the scent before she left. So you don't forget what hope smells like, she'd said, smiling that wide, dimpled grin that always reminded Naomi of him. Naomi's hand trembled as she reached for the phone, then stopped halfway. Hospitals meant money. Hospitals meant leaving Aaliyah alone. And she couldn't, not yet. Not until she knew her daughter was safe. She turned her head toward the photo frame on the table. It was cracked, but inside it was a memory frozen in color, Aaliyah at 3 years old, laughing, curls wild, eyes the exact same storm gray as his. Naomi closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Please God, let him see her. Just once. Let him know. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the morning light. The skyscraper loomed ahead, a mirror of glass and sky. Aaliyah craned her neck back, her tiny figure dwarfed by the enormity of it. She pulled her coat tighter and took a deep breath. Inside, the lobby was marble and silence. Grown-ups in suits moved like clockwork, eyes glued to screens, voices low and sharp. Aaliyah hesitated only for a moment before walking up to the front desk. The receptionist blinked down at her. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" "No, ma'am," Aaliyah said, standing as tall as she could. "I'm here to see Mr. Alexander Knight." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Knight? He's in a meeting. Do you have an appointment?" Aaliyah nodded solemnly and pulled out the folded paper from her pocket. "I have a letter." The receptionist looked torn, between amusement and confusion, but something in Aaliyah's eyes made her pause. That unwavering calm. That quiet fire. "Let me see what I can do," she murmured, picking up the phone. Aaliyah clutched her mother's photo tighter as she waited. Upstairs, Alexander Knight sat behind his glass desk, eyes scanning numbers that refused to make sense. He'd read the letter 3 times since morning, every line carved into his chest. Her mother is dying. She doesn't have much time. His mind told him it couldn't be true. There were tests, proof, procedures. His heart told him he already knew. The door opened. His assistant, nervous, said softly, "Sir, there's a child here to see you." He looked up sharply. "A child? She says her name is Aaliyah." "She." The pen slipped from his hand. The world tilted. "Send her in." The words left him before reason could stop them. When the door opened, it wasn't what he expected. She was small, dressed in a too-big coat, curls escaping her hat, clutching a photograph to her chest. Her eyes, gray, flecked with storm, met his. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped forward carefully, like she was afraid she'd wake up if she moved too fast. "Hello, Mr. Knight," she said softly. "My name is Aaliyah." His breath caught. She held out the folded letter. "My mom told me to give you this. She said it's important." He took it, his fingers brushing hers. Warmth. Real. He opened the paper slowly, afraid of what it would confirm. It was Naomi's handwriting again, fainter now, weaker. "If you're reading this, Alexander, it means I couldn't tell you myself. I didn't want to destroy what you built. I just wanted her to know her father. She's strong. Brave. Everything you once were before the world made you forget." The words blurred as his eyes burned. "Where is your mother now?" he asked, voice barely steady. Aaliyah's lip trembled. "She was too sick to come. But she said she'll be okay once she knows you believe me." He felt something inside him crack, the kind of pain no wealth could silence. He knelt in front of her. "Aaliyah, how did you get here?" "2 buses," she said proudly. "And I practiced my speech on the way. I was scared, but Mama said bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about moving anyway." He smiled faintly, tears threatening. That sounded exactly like Naomi. Downstairs, Victoria stepped out of the elevator, her voice already raised. "Why am I hearing there's a child in your office? Alexander, what is going?" Her eyes froze on the little girl by the window. The resemblance was undeniable. "Who is this?" she demanded. Alexander didn't answer. He was still staring at Aaliyah, at the way her small hands pressed against the glass, at the faint hum she made under her breath. It was the same melody Naomi had hummed that night during the storm. Something ancient and buried inside him stirred. Victoria's voice cut through it like glass. "You can't seriously believe." He turned, eyes cold now but wet. "Enough." She blinked, stunned. He straightened, walking toward his desk. The storm that had been brewing in him all day finally broke. Logic said it was madness. PR said it was suicide. But his soul, the one he'd buried under years of steel and strategy, was screaming the truth. This child wasn't an accident. She was his. He looked to his assistant. "Cancel my meetings." "Sir." He met her eyes. All of them. Victoria stepped closer. Alexander, don't. He didn't even look at her. His voice was calm, final. I'm going to her. The room fell silent, the words hanging in the air like the start of a storm. And for the first time in 8 years, Alexander Knight didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man finally ready to come home. The car stopped in front of a narrow building whose bricks were more memory than structure. Paint peeled from the walls, and the iron staircase groaned under the weight of the years. The air smelled of rain, rust, and something faintly sweet, lavender, lingering like a ghost. Alexander Knight had walked through marble palaces and sat beneath crystal chandeliers. But nothing had ever made his chest tighten the way this place did. He climbed the stairs slowly, every step heavier than the last. Each creak seemed to whisper 8 years. 8 years too late. He stopped at the door with the number half faded from the wood, 3B. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then, before he could knock, the door cracked open. Aaliyah stood there, her curls a little messier than before, her eyes shining with both joy and worry. You came, she whispered, smiling in disbelief. He knelt to her level, his throat too tight for words. Of course I came. She grabbed his hand, small fingers curling around his like she'd done it her whole life, and led him inside. The apartment was small but warm. A thin curtain fluttered over the cracked window. Books were stacked in corners. The air hummed with the soft buzz of an old heater. On the table, 2 teacups sat waiting, one empty, one half full, still steaming. And on the couch, Naomi. She was paler now, thinner than he remembered, her hair tucked beneath a faded scarf. But when her eyes lifted to meet his, the years fell away. Lavender and firelight. Snow and silence. The night that changed everything. Naomi. His voice broke on her name. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. You found us. He crossed the room in 3 unsteady steps and stopped beside her. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled. He was there before she fell, his hands catching her shoulders, steadying her like he used to steady the world. Don't move, he murmured. I wanted to greet you properly, she whispered. But my body, it doesn't always listen anymore. His throat ached. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call? Naomi looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. Because our daughter needed you, and I was afraid you didn't. The words hit like a blade made of truth. He sank onto the edge of the couch, staring at her. You think I wouldn't have wanted her? She met his eyes. You didn't even want me. He flinched. That's not true. Then why did you never come back? She asked softly. I waited, Alexander. For a week. Then a month. Then I stopped counting. The air thickened with silence, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Aaliyah sat on the floor nearby, hugging her knees, watching them like she knew, instinctively, that this moment was sacred. He rubbed a hand over his face. I thought that night was just a dream. A mistake I wasn't supposed to want. Naomi's laugh was small and broken. It wasn't a mistake. It was home. You just forgot what that felt like. Her words cracked something inside him that had been sealed for years. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the strength it had taken to raise their daughter alone. The fight in her eyes even as her body gave up. Naomi, he said, voice trembling, I'm so sorry. She reached for his hand, her fingers cold but steady. Don't be. I didn't tell you because I wanted her to grow up knowing love, not pity. And she did. But she deserves to know her father too. Aaliyah looked up then, eyes glistening. He's here now, Mama. Naomi smiled faintly, brushing a curl from her daughter's face. I see that, baby. Alexander swallowed hard. You're coming with me. Both of you. I'll get you the best doctors. She stopped him with a weak shake of her head. It's too late for that. No, he stood abruptly. It's not. You've survived this long. I'll fly you anywhere, Switzerland, Mayo, I don't care what it costs. Alexander. Her voice was soft, final. Please. Sit. He did, slowly, like a man defying gravity. Naomi's gaze softened. You've always believed you could fix everything if you just worked harder. But not everything broken needs saving. Some things just need peace. He pressed his fists to his knees, unable to meet her eyes. "You can't ask me to watch you die." She smiled faintly. "Then don't. Watch her live." The words undid him. Tears spilled down before he could stop them. The man who hadn't cried since his father's funeral, who had turned pain into power, was reduced to the boy he once was, kneeling beside a woman who had seen the parts of him no one else ever would. "I should have been there," he whispered. "I know," Naomi said, her hand trembling as it reached to his cheek. "But you're here now. And maybe that's enough." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain against the window and the soft hum of Aaliyah's lullaby as she traced circles on her mother's palm. The kind of silence that feels like forgiveness. Then Naomi's expression shifted, fear flickering behind her calm. "You have to be careful, Alexander." He looked up sharply. "Why?" She hesitated, glancing at the door as if the walls themselves were listening. "Victoria," she said finally, her voice low. "She knows. Or she will soon. She'll try to stop you." He frowned. "Stop me from what?" "From doing what's right." The room went still. Naomi's breathing grew shallow, her hand clutching his. "She won't let go of you easily. Power never does." He squeezed her hand gently. "She can try." "Promise me," Naomi whispered, eyes closing. "No matter what she says, no matter what she does, you protect Aaliyah." "I swear it," he said, his voice breaking on every word. Naomi smiled, the faintest ghost of peace touching her lips. "Then maybe I can finally rest." Her head fell softly against the cushion. Alexander froze, terror flooding him. "Naomi." Her eyes fluttered open, a small smile still there. "Not yet," she whispered. "I'm just tired." He exhaled shakily, his hand trembling around hers. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm brewing again after years of quiet. And in that moment, Alexander Knight realized that this small apartment, this fragile place of love and loss, held more of his heart than all the empires he'd ever built. He looked at Aaliyah, then back at Naomi. And he knew that whatever storm came next, he wasn't walking away this time. The next morning began not with sunlight, but with silence. A heavy, bruised silence that clung to Alexander like smoke. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office. The city stretched beneath him like a kingdom he no longer wanted to rule. On the polished glass table behind him lay a sealed white envelope marked, "Confidential, DNA results." It had arrived earlier that morning, hand-delivered, just as he'd requested. The moment he saw it, his heart had pounded like it hadn't since childhood. He told himself he was ready for the truth. But truth, he was learning, rarely came without blood. He turned as Victoria entered, immaculate as always in a cream suit and sharp heels, her perfume slicing through the air like a weapon disguised as sweetness. "You're early," he said flatly. "I thought you'd want support," she replied with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This must be difficult." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You knew about Naomi." Her smile froze for a second, but she recovered. "I didn't know. I suspected she might resurface eventually. People like her always do." He looked at her then, really looked, and realized how easily he'd once believed her. "People like her," he repeated quietly. Victoria shrugged. "The kind who think love and money are interchangeable. She sees you on magazine covers, hears your name whispered in boardrooms, and suddenly, she remembers you. With a child, no less." Alexander's fingers brushed the envelope. The paper felt heavier than steel. "She didn't ask for money." "She didn't have to," Victoria murmured. "That's what makes it clever." He broke the seal. The sound was small. But to him, it felt like thunder. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper, scanning the black print that blurred before his eyes. Result: 0% probability of biological relationship. For a moment, his mind refused to process it. Then the words hit, cold and absolute. 0. He read it again. And again. But the result didn't change. His chest hollowed out. The letter slipped from his fingers and floated to the floor like the last page of a story that never should have been written. Behind him, Victoria placed a careful hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry, darling." He didn't respond. Couldn't. His throat felt lined with glass. She sighed softly. "You see? This was a scam. She wanted to play on your guilt. He turned toward her, eyes distant. She didn't look like a liar. They never do, she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. But it's over now. You can move on. He stood rigid in her embrace. Something deep inside him, something raw and ancient, was screaming. But he silenced it. He always had. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Cancel her treatment. Have legal handle it. Victoria smiled faintly against his shoulder. Of course. 2 days later. Rain streaked down the windows of Naomi's apartment like tears from a sky that had forgotten how to stop crying. Naomi sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the oxygen machine humming softly nearby. Aaliyah was drawing on the floor, a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. When the knock came, she looked up hopefully. Maybe it's him, Mommy. Naomi's heart fluttered despite herself. Maybe. But when the door opened, Alexander's eyes were not the same ones that had looked at her with warmth days earlier. They were dark, unreadable. He stepped inside but didn't move closer. I got the results. Naomi's pulse quickened. And he swallowed. It says she's not mine. The room seemed to tilt. Naomi blinked, shaking her head slowly. That can't be right. Alexander handed her the paper, his hands trembling despite the ice in his tone. You told me the truth. I did, she whispered. He looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then explain this. She scanned the report, her vision blurring from tears and exhaustion. No, this isn't possible. She is yours, Alexander. I swear to you. But he had already looked away. Victoria was right, he murmured. I wanted to believe you. God, I needed to. But this, he gestured to the paper. This ends it. Naomi's breath hitched. You think I would make something like this up? After everything? He didn't answer. Aaliyah looked between them, confused. Daddy. The word froze him in place. Naomi's eyes filled. Please, don't walk away from her. She didn't do anything wrong. But Alexander's voice was barely human now, flat mechanical, the way it sounded in boardrooms when deals turned ruthless. Goodbye, Naomi. And just like that, he turned and left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than thunder. Aaliyah stared at the door for a long time before whispering, Was it me? Am I not good enough to be loved? Naomi broke. She pulled her daughter into her arms, tears soaking into Aaliyah's hair. No, baby. Never say that. You are loved. You hear me? But Aaliyah's little voice cracked. Then why doesn't he want us? Naomi couldn't answer. She just held her tighter, as if love alone could rewrite a lie. Later that night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights glittering below like a mockery of hope. The DNA report lay on his desk beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. He replayed every moment, the scent of lavender, the way Aaliyah had said his name, Naomi's trembling smile. It all felt real. Too real. So why did the paper say otherwise? He poured another drink, but his hand stopped midair when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then something in him, instinct or maybe guilt, made him answer. Knight. A pause. Then a man's voice, low and nervous. Mr. Knight? This is, Dr. Landon, from the Knight Medical Lab. Alexander frowned. Yes. I shouldn't be calling you, but I thought you should know. Your assistant, Ms. Victoria, she came by before the results were finalized. Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. What are you saying? She, requested a reprint and said she'd handle delivery personally. But when I checked the digital copy just now, the data doesn't match the printed one. The file was tampered with. For a moment, Alexander couldn't breathe. Are you certain? He asked, voice low, deadly calm. Positive, sir. I have the original right here. It shows a 99.97% probability of biological relation. The silence that followed was colder than winter. Send it to me, Alexander said quietly. Yes, sir. Right away. He ended the call and stared out at the city, the truth dawning like a storm. Victoria hadn't just lied. She'd erased his daughter. His reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, his eyes darker, sharper. The man who had walked out of that apartment 2 days ago was gone. What remained was someone else entirely. Alexander Knight stood, his chair scraping against the marble floor, his voice low and burning. "She wanted a war," he whispered. "She just got one." The rain came down hard that night, slashing against the glass walls of Alexander Knight's penthouse like the storm was demanding to be let in. His reflection, cold, tired, and haunted, stared back at him through the window. The city below glowed like it was alive, pulsing with light and noise, yet his world had never felt so still. The unopened email on his laptop screen blinked. The subject line was short, sterile, almost cruel in its simplicity: confidential, DNA verification inquiry. Alexander's hand hovered over the mouse. His chest tightened. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what he already suspected. But he clicked. And as the message unfolded, so did the truth he'd been both chasing and avoiding since the day the lavender-scented letter arrived. Earlier that day, his world had already begun to crack. He'd been in his office, the empire he'd built from dust reflected in steel and glass, when he overheard something that made his blood run cold. His assistant, nervous and stammering, had been whispering into the phone. "Yes, Mrs. Victoria Knight. I made the call to the lab as you asked. The new results have been uploaded." The receiver slipped from his hand. He didn't hear the rest. He didn't need to. An hour later, Alexander was in his car, the city lights streaking past like blurred memories. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every red light, every delay felt like a punishment. The hospital was nearly empty when he arrived. The fluorescent lights hummed like dying bees, and the receptionist's voice was a monotone drone when she said, "Visiting hours are over." He flashed his name, and the tone changed immediately. "Oh, of course, Mr. Knight. Right this way." Naomi was sleeping when he stepped into the room. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale, her hands small against the sheets. Machines beeped softly beside her, steady but fragile. For a moment, he couldn't move. He just stood there, his throat tightening with everything he'd wanted to say but never could. Then the door opened behind him. Victoria's heels clicked against the tile. Her perfume filled the air like poison. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice sharp, but trembling beneath its surface. He turned. "You had the lab results changed." Her eyes flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Victoria." His tone was low, deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that made her step back. "You called the lab. You paid someone to alter the test. I heard it myself." She straightened, regaining her poise. "I did what was necessary. For us. For your reputation, your company, everything we built together." Alexander took a step closer. "We didn't build anything. I did. You just waited to inherit it." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "And that woman? That charity case? You'd throw it all away for her." He glanced back at Naomi, sleeping, frail, innocent in her silence. "For her? I'd burn the world if it meant making this right." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but beneath the venom, there was something else: fear. "You think you know what happened 8 years ago? You think she's the saint you remember?" "Get out," he said, his voice low, final. She hesitated, then turned, her heels echoing down the corridor like a verdict. Hours passed. The city began to fade into dawn. Alexander sat beside Naomi, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Every sound of the monitor felt like a countdown. He reached for his phone, scrolling through old contacts until he found one: Dr. Elijah Parks, Private Diagnostics. He typed a single message: "I need a full DNA test. Independently verified. No chain of custody through Knight Industries." The reply came minutes later: "Understood. Discretion guaranteed." Days bled into one another. While Naomi rested, Alexander moved like a man possessed. He dug into old emails, security logs, archived communications, anything that could explain the chasm between then and now. And that's when he found it. A deleted folder buried in his old corporate server. Date stamped 8 years ago. Inside were intercepted letters, emails Naomi had sent to him back when he was still clawing his way through his father's debts, letters that never reached his inbox. One stood out. Alexander, I'm late. I don't want anything from you. I just thought you should know. The sender's address? Naomi Johnson. The recipient? Alexander Knight. The blocker? Victoria Hale. He stared at the metadata, disbelief turning into fury. The access trail led to her assistant, under her login credentials. She hadn't just manipulated the present. She'd rewritten the past. He sank back into his chair, running a hand over his face. The betrayal was complete, meticulous. The woman he thought he knew had stolen 8 years of his life, and a child's right to her father. His phone buzzed again. A new message from Dr. Parks. Results are ready. Secure delivery preferred. In person only. When Alexander arrived at the lab, the air felt different, thick, expectant. Dr. Parks, a man known for his precision and lack of emotion, looked unusually tense. He handed Alexander a sealed envelope. We ran it 3 times. Chain of custody's airtight. No external tampering possible. Alexander's heart pounded. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. There, printed in clean, clinical text. Probability of paternity, 99.97% conclusion. Aaliyah Johnson is the biological daughter of Alexander Knight. For a moment, the world fell silent. The hum of machines, the buzz of electricity, even his own breath, it all vanished. He stared at the words like they were holy. Then slowly, something inside him cracked open. A weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying slipped off his shoulders, replaced by something heavier but purer, resolve. He drove straight to the hospital. Naomi was awake this time, sitting up weakly as sunlight poured through the blinds. Her eyes widened when she saw him. You came back. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her bed. I never should have left. Tears shimmered in her eyes. You saw the test? He nodded. I did. She's mine. Naomi smiled faintly, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She never stopped believing. I know, he whispered. Neither will I. He took her hand, cold, frail, but alive. You're going to get treatment. The best there is. I don't care what it costs. Alexander. He squeezed her hand tighter. No arguments. A small, broken laugh escaped her lips. Still stubborn. Still in love, he almost said, but stopped himself. The words hovered between them anyway, unspoken but real. Then his expression darkened. Naomi, there's more. I found out what really happened 8 years ago. The emails you sent, the ones I never replied to, they were intercepted. By Victoria. Naomi's eyes widened. She did this? He nodded. She made sure I'd never know. She built her empire on our silence. Naomi turned her face toward the window, tears sliding down her cheeks. All this time. I thought you chose to forget me. He reached out, brushing away the tear. Never. You were the one thing I couldn't forget, no matter how hard I tried. The room fell quiet again, just their breathing, the faint hum of life outside, and the weight of a truth finally unearthed. As Alexander left the hospital that night, his phone rang. The number was blocked. He hesitated before answering. A distorted voice whispered on the other end, low and urgent. Mr. Knight, this isn't over. The woman you're engaged to, she's not working alone. Alexander froze. Who is this? The line went dead. He stood there in the cold, phone pressed to his ear, mind racing. The truth was out. But the storm that had buried it? It was only just beginning to rise again. The city hadn't yet woken when Alexander Knight's car tore through the early morning fog. The skyline ahead was painted in soft shades of gold and gray, but inside him there was only one color, urgency. The DNA results still trembled in his pocket, the paper damp from the rain and the sweat on his palms. 99.97%. The numbers burned themselves into his mind. Facts, figures, proof, things he'd always trusted. But today, it wasn't the math that mattered. It was the miracle behind it. He wasn't driving toward a scandal. He was driving toward his daughter. By the time he reached Naomi's building, his heart was pounding like it had been caged for 8 years and was finally breaking free. He barely knocked before the door creaked open, and there she was, Aaliyah. Her tiny frame was backlit by the dim hallway light, her curls messy, her pajamas covered in faded cartoon prints. But it was her eyes that stopped him, Naomi's eyes. Wide, gentle, uncertain. She blinked up at him. You came back. He dropped to his knees before he could stop himself, the air catching in his throat. Yes. I did. She tilted her head, clutching a worn photograph in her hand, the same one he'd seen on Naomi's bedside table. It was of him, taken years ago, before the towers, before the silence. Her little voice wavered. Mommy said you might not believe me. His vision blurred. He reached out, his voice barely a whisper. Aaliyah, I believe you. I believe everything now. For a moment, time froze. Then, without another word, she dropped the photo and ran straight into his arms. Daddy, she cried. The word, small, fragile, holy, split him open. He caught her, holding her so tight it was as if he could make up for every missed bedtime, every school recital, every birthday he hadn't known existed. His shoulders shook, silent sobs breaking the armor he'd worn for years. Daddy's here, he whispered into her hair. Daddy's not going anywhere again. Naomi stirred at the sound of their voices. She tried to sit up, her breathing shallow. When she saw them, her lips trembled into a weak smile. I told you, she whispered hoarsely, he'd come. Aaliyah turned, still holding Alexander's hand. Mommy, he's really my daddy. He said so. Naomi's eyes softened as tears slid down her cheeks. I know, baby. I know. Alexander stood and crossed to her side. His throat felt raw. You should have never had to fight this alone. She shook her head faintly. I wasn't alone. I had her. And that was enough. He took her hand, the same hand that had once pulled him out of a snowstorm, back when he was just a man and she was just a woman with warmth to give. You shouldn't have had to choose between pride and love. Naomi's smile was faint but real. And you shouldn't have had to forget what love feels like. He swallowed hard. Then let's remember together. Later that afternoon, the night tower boardroom filled with a sharp scent of power, polished wood, perfume, fear. Victoria stood at the head of the table, poised in her designer suit, pretending nothing had unraveled. But Alexander's arrival turned every head. He didn't wear his usual mask today. No tailored calm. No corporate smile. Only fire. He dropped a folder on the table with a slap that made even the senior partners flinch. Inside, he said, voice cold, is a signed statement from the lab technician who altered the paternity results. Along with the payment receipts. From you. Victoria's face drained of color. Alexander, this is ridiculous. He cut her off. No. What's ridiculous is thinking you could manipulate my life, my company, and my child and still stand here. Gasps whispered across the room. He stepped closer, voice low, sharp enough to cut through glass. You didn't just lie to me, Victoria. You stole 8 years of a little girl's childhood. You kept her father from her. You made me doubt the only woman who ever loved me without a contract attached. Her mask cracked, fury spilling out. I did it for you. For us. That woman was nothing. He slammed his hand against the table. She was everything. The room fell silent. He straightened, eyes sweeping across the board. Effective immediately, Victoria Hale is removed from her position as COO. Her shares are frozen pending legal review. Security will escort her out. No one moved at first, until Alexander turned toward the head of security and nodded once. Victoria's heels clacked against marble as she stormed out, the empire she'd clung to slipping from her grip. For the first time in his life, Alexander didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man reclaiming his soul. By the time he returned to the hospital that evening, the sky had turned violet, and the city lights shimmered through the window like stars had come to rest beside Naomi's bed. Aaliyah was curled up asleep beside her mother, her small hand tucked in Naomi's. Naomi looked weaker now, her breath shorter, her voice barely above a whisper. But her eyes lit up when she saw him. You did it, didn't you? She asked. He nodded, kneeling beside her. She's gone. She'll never hurt you, or Aaliyah, again. Naomi exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and pain. Thank you. He took her hand gently. You don't have to thank me. Just stay. That's all I need. Her lips trembled. I wish I could promise that. He froze. Don't say that. She's strong, Naomi whispered, glancing at Aaliyah. She'll need you when I can't be here. Don't, he said, shaking his head, voice breaking. Don't talk like that. I'm getting you treatment, whatever it takes. Naomi smiled faintly, that soft, knowing smile that had once melted the ice in him. Some storms you can't outspend, Alexander. He lowered his head, pressing his forehead against her hand. Then I'll fight it with you. Her breathing hitched. You already are. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy with everything they never said, the regrets, the love, the years lost and found again. Aaliyah stirred in her sleep and whispered, Daddy. Alexander looked at her, tears filling his eyes. Yes, sweetheart. She smiled, half awake. Mommy says love always finds its way home. He looked back at Naomi, his voice cracking. She's right. Naomi smiled through her tears. That's because her heart never learned how to give up. Outside the window, dawn began to bloom again, the same kind of light that had started it all 8 years ago, when a lost man had found warmth in a stranger's arms. Now that warmth was flickering, fragile but still alive. He kissed Naomi's hand, his voice a vow. You're not leaving us. Not yet. You'll see her grow up. You'll see everything we lost come back. Naomi's eyes fluttered closed, her lips moving faintly. If I can't, you will for me. Her hand went still in his. Naomi, he whispered. Her chest rose once, then faltered. The monitor stuttered. Naomi. The door burst open, nurses rushing in, voices shouting orders. Alexander was pulled back as machines whirred to life, the sound of alarms piercing the air. Aaliyah woke up, terrified, calling for her mother. Alexander held her tight, heart shattering as he whispered against her hair, Hold on, baby. Mommy's going to be okay. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some loves come with storms you can't stop. And some are worth weathering anyway. The sun rose over the city like a promise. Its golden light spilled through the wide glass windows of the night penthouse, warming the once cold marble floors, dancing across fresh flowers, children's toys, and the faint scent of lavender that seemed to linger no matter how many times the housekeepers cleaned. For the first time in years, Alexander Knight's home felt alive. Laughter echoed down the hallway, light, musical, unguarded. It was the sound of Aaliyah chasing her shadow while Naomi watched from the couch, a blanket around her shoulders and a softness in her eyes that time and illness hadn't managed to erase. Alexander stood in the doorway, a mug of coffee in hand, simply watching. A year ago, he would have been buried in spreadsheets, board meetings, and cold silence. Now he couldn't imagine missing a single sound of this, his daughter's laughter, Naomi's quiet joy, the heartbeat of a life rebuilt from ruin. Naomi's recovery hadn't been easy. The first few weeks after her collapse were full of sterile rooms and whispered prayers. Alexander had refused to leave her side. When the new treatment started showing results, he personally funded a research grant in her doctor's name. When her appetite returned, he hired a chef to cook her favorite meals from the little diner she once worked in. And when she was strong enough to walk again, he brought her and Aaliyah home, to his home. But he'd changed it. Gone were the sleek, sterile designs. In their place were soft colors, family photos, drawings Aaliyah had made tacked to the refrigerator. There was even a tiny shoe rack by the door where Naomi would smile and say, I still can't believe we live here. Every time, Alexander would answer, You don't live here, Naomi. You belong here. And she did. The seasons passed quietly, measured not in fiscal quarters but in memories. Naomi teaching Aaliyah to bake cookies and accidentally setting off the smoke alarm. Alexander building a pillow fort and pretending it was Knight Industries' junior division. Family dinners where laughter outnumbered words. The man who once ruled from glass towers now learned how to braid a child's hair, how to tell bedtime stories, how to listen without fixing, and love without fear. And though Naomi's scars remained, her strength grew brighter every day. Her laughter came easier. Her eyes no longer held the shadow of goodbye. On the morning of Aaliyah's 8th birthday, the penthouse was a swirl of balloons, frosting, and music. Daddy, it's crooked, she complained, watching him try to hang a banner. Alexander laughed. It's not crooked. It's modern art. Naomi chuckled from the table. Everything you touch becomes a corporate presentation, doesn't it? He grinned, feigning offense. I'm diversifying my portfolio into party management. They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from people who have survived storms together. And then, as the guests began to arrive, friends from school, a few of Alexander's closest allies, and even Dr. Parks, the moment arrived. Aaliyah's cake was covered in pink icing and topped with a single golden candle shaped like the number 8. Make a wish, birthday girl, Naomi said softly. Aaliyah closed her eyes, clutching her mother's hand on one side and her father's on the other. I already got mine, she whispered before blowing the candle out. Alexander felt his throat tighten. He had no idea how much one little girl could heal. As the evening sun dipped low, painting the room in amber, Alexander turned to Aaliyah and whispered, "You ready?" She nodded eagerly, her curls bouncing. She slipped something small and silver into her pocket and followed him to where Naomi was sitting by the window, watching the skyline that had once separated them. Naomi smiled as they approached. What's going on? Alexander dropped to one knee. Naomi froze, her hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Aaliyah giggled, pulling a tiny velvet box from her pocket. Daddy said I get to help this time. Naomi's breath caught. Help with what? Alexander took the ring from Aaliyah's small hand, his voice low, steady, but trembling with emotion. Naomi Johnson, you once opened your door to a stranger in a snowstorm and saved him without asking for anything in return. You gave him warmth when he was cold, truth when he was lost, and a daughter when he didn't think he deserved one. Naomi's tears spilled freely now, her shoulders shaking. Alexander continued, his voice breaking, You turned my house into a home. You turned my silence into laughter. And every time I look at our daughter, I see the miracle you brought into my life. So if you'll let me, if you'll still have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never face another storm alone. Naomi couldn't speak. Her voice dissolved into a trembling whisper as she nodded. Yes, she breathed. 1,000 times yes. Aaliyah squealed, jumping up and down as Alexander slipped the ring onto Naomi's finger. The room erupted into applause, laughter, and tears. Naomi leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. 8 years ago, I thought I lost you forever, she whispered. He smiled softly. 8 years ago, I didn't even know what I was losing. Now I do. Later that night, when the guests had gone and Aaliyah had fallen asleep between them on the couch, Naomi reached into the drawer of the coffee table. She pulled out an old, weathered envelope, the same lavender-scented letter that had started it all. She handed it to Aaliyah, who sat up sleepily. Do you remember this? Aaliyah nodded. It's the letter I sent you, Daddy. The one that made you come find us. Alexander took the letter carefully, tracing the faded ink. Naomi smiled through her tears. Go on, sweet girl. Tell him what you told me the day you wrote it. Aaliyah sat straighter, her small voice trembling but clear. This was the letter that made me lose a daddy and find a family. Silence filled the room. The kind of silence that doesn't need words. Naomi wiped a tear from Aaliyah's cheek. You didn't lose him, baby. You just had to help him find his way home. Alexander's chest ached in the best way possible. He gathered them both in his arms, holding on as if time itself could be stopped by love. Outside, the city glowed, alive, forgiving. The same skyline that once mirrored Alexander's emptiness now shimmered with reflection and rebirth. He looked down at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, her head resting on Naomi's lap. Then he looked at Naomi, who smiled softly, her hand resting over his heart. For years, they had lived in separate worlds, one built on glass and ambition, the other on quiet strength and survival. Now those worlds had finally met. The Iron CEO had become something greater, a father, a man, a whole human being. Tears filled his eyes again, not from regret, but from the strange, beautiful ache of finally being complete. Naomi whispered, her voice gentle as the dawn, What are you thinking? He looked at her, then at Aaliyah, and smiled. I'm thinking, he said quietly, that the storm is over. And as the city lights flickered against the window and the scent of lavender drifted through the air, Alexander Knight held his daughter close, kissed the woman who had saved him twice, and let the tears fall. Not from pain, but from peace. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.